Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Got a great guest today, my friend Jacob Gossel, host of Awake, Aware, Alive. It's a podcast you could find everywhere on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on all the podcast places. Jacob is an interesting dude. He's a musician, he's an artist, fantastic artist. He makes a lot of really cool cover art. You could check out all that stuff at Jacob Gossel, GOSSEL.com. Awake, Aware, Alive is the name of the podcast. He's got all of his podcasts up there with his beautiful cover art. Sophia Rocklin, the wonderful Sophia Rocklin, was his latest guest, and he's had Charles Eisenstein, he's had Mitch Schultz, he's had Jen Sodini, of course, Corey Allen, Ramin Nazer, Michael Phillip, just to name a few, some people that we know and love around here as well. So Jacob's awesome. I met him through the Isolation Tank series that we were doing, the live stream through Evolve and Ascend and DMT the Spirit Molecule during the lockdown phase of the pandemic. And that was really fun. That was really interesting. Met a lot of wonderful people through that. And Jacob and I have sort of noticed each other in the podcast space and been like, I kind of like what you're doing over there. Okay, cool. So I was really happy when we got to sit down and actually talk, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy this one. So if you're interested in what Jacob's doing, go check it out, jacobgossel.com, Gossel, and give him a listen, give him a shout, check out his art, check out his music, and all that good stuff. Thanks to everybody that leaves ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. If you've never done anything for the show ever and you listen, just take 3 seconds out of your day if you can to go and just click 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Click 5 stars if you think the show deserves 5 stars. That would be wonderful. If you have feedback, if you want to tell me things, please message me. I'm open. I am not rigid in any way. I'm open to hearing people's feedback. So message me if there's something that I said on the show that you didn't like, that you disagreed with. You know, I get these messages sometimes, and I'm down to engage. I'm down to have a healthy conversation. I no way in any way want to appear that I'm like off limits in that capacity. Totally open. So sometimes it might take me a little bit to get back to you, especially if it's a long message, but know that they're welcomed. And it's good to hear the feedback. You know, I've actually gotten a few people that have said the intros are too long. So that's making me consider doing a different style. Like, I don't think I'm going to do these intro in the beginning of the shows anymore. I think we're just going to hop right into the show, because it's really about the content. You know, it's not about the format or any of that kind of stuff. That's not really what this podcast is about. So with that in mind, we're going to keep this one really short, but I just want to say that we have 296 5-star ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. It would be wonderful to get to 300. That would make me feel really good. That would make the show bump up in the rankings and the ratings, get more people involved and listening. But I recently checked out this website called Chartable, and they show that Mikeadelic actually has 368 ratings and reviews. And I noticed that I think they're not showing the ones on Apple Podcasts that are from other countries. So I just want to give a big shout out to all the people out there from Canada, from New Zealand, from Finland, from Norway, from Israel, from Sweden, from Germany, from the UK, Great Britain. I see your comments. I see your reviews in here. I see your feedback. Thank you so much to all of you, every single one of you. And if you want to go a step further, you can go onto my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Mike Brank, BRANC, and you become a patron. You can become. I will bestow you with patronage to this show. And at $5 a month, that's when you get bonus episodes, early access releases, the Discord chat community. And we're going to be thinking about a lot of fun things to do coming up with that. And one of the things I do want to do is have like a group Zoom chat. I want to get you people involved. If you want to get in and have a conversation and jam, you know, we're going to have mind jams. I was doing these live shows, these mind jams in Denver. I want to start bringing that more to the virtual space and get you guys that are listening involved. get a guest on, start asking them questions. Say I have Charles Eisenstein come on the pod. We'll do a podcast, and then we'll do a special bonus segment for the patrons, and have a little Q&A portion of that. So just some ideas that I'm tinkering with, but I'm thinking of ways that I can give more. And apologies if I've been a little scattered. I've been outside a lot this summer. I've been vacationing. I've been having trips. I've been camping. I've been off the grid. I've been out of cell service areas. I've been unplugged, and it's been wonderful. It's been great. But now we're moving into the fall. Work is getting done. We're gonna have a lot of cool stuff coming up. So that's pretty much it. Check out studentloantutor.com. Zach Geist, the Zeitgeist podcast, Student Loan Tutor. If you have debt, if you have student loan debt, check out studentloantutor.com. Go there, request to have a consultation. Tell them you heard about it from Mikeadelic, the Mike Brancatelli podcast. There's no offer code or any of that kind of stuff. So make sure you tell them this is just a reciprocal gift economy type of thing that we have going here. They've helped me out a tremendous amount with my debt, with my financial situation, and I'm trying to give back by promoting to them. So shout out to Zach. Zach, I love you, buddy. You're the man. Zach Geist, studentloantutor.com. Please go check them out if you have any kind of debt, especially student loan debt. Student loan debt is what they primarily work with. So just reach out to them, and they're willing to have a conversation with you to see if they can resolve your issues. And that's it. There's no more sponsors. We're going to have more sponsors, but I'm going to keep that a secret because we got some awesome ones. We got some awesome sponsors. We got some awesome ideas. And I want to hear from you. Message me. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you like about the show. Tell me what's good. Give me your feedback. You don't have to sugarcoat it. You don't have to make it nice. Just shoot me a text and say, I like this, I like that, I don't like that. Well, a message. Mikeadelic _podcast on Instagram and mikeadelicpod@gmail.com. I'm thinking about doing a newsletter. I have never done one because I personally hate emails. I don't open them. I don't open anybody's emails. I've never seen an email once that I've been like, ooh, this is interesting. I personally think emails are kind of going the way of the dinosaur. I don't know. But who knows? With censorship and all this kind of stuff, there's other platforms like Telegram and email and Signal and these other places. So we'll try and look into stuff like that. Okay, so that's like announcements, all right, and the guest and stuff. And let's just get into it with Jacob Gossel. Awake, Aware, Alive is the podcast. Let's get into this chat with Jacob.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open to us the possibility that everything we know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Or is it perception?
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
But yeah, how's it been for you? You're in Minnesota, right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, it's been interesting. I was moving, so I lived in Minneapolis. I've lived in Minneapolis since like 2012, in the city, not downtown, but right in the city area. And I enjoyed it for a handful of years, and progressively was getting more and more burnt out on this kind of city environment. And COVID was actually a great excuse to want to leave. And so I made plans to move, and right as I was moving is when the big protests and the looting were all going on, not too far from where I was at. So, but I didn't, I didn't really see much of it. Like it was in a pretty, pretty confined area. It didn't spread out too much. But then, like the last kind of day I was moving out, you could tell that businesses were starting to preemptively kind of board up their windows and everything. So it was looking pretty Mad Max-ish down there for a little while. And I haven't really been down and around the city too much. I know it's still kind of been pretty chaotic in some ways, but I'm doing all right. Got out of the city, which is nice. Started a garden and trying to learn some like homesteading type stuff,
Yeah, dude, I'm doing. My mind is in the same place. I haven't moved out of the city yet, but I guess, one of my intentions was I lived in New York City for 8 years, and then I was like, enough of that. I went to Peru. I lived in the jungle for a little bit. I came back and I was like, no, fuck this. And I decided Colorado, Denver would be like, it was like me dipping my toes into like a smaller city, before I exit into the wilderness, grow a beard, and start making my own honey. But I'm feeling that, I got a garden at my house. We got like pumpkins and zucchini and squash and mint. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. And my mind is just going there. Like my girlfriend and I are thinking about, we just got back from a camping trip down in southwestern Colorado, like Ouray, Telluride area, and we're just like, man, it's so nice down here. Like, why are we in the city? Like, let's get out. I want to just build a home and like grow things and hunt things and fish things.
Exactly, dude. That's exactly where my head's at. And it's tough because you kind of, there's certainly a bit of idealization in it.
Yeah.
For me anyway. It's like, I can tell, like, okay, you're kind of romanticizing this a bit. But at the same time, it just feels like totally necessary, like not right in this moment, but like, from my perspective, I don't see things in the future getting any less chaotic, at least for probably, 10 years or something,
But Jacob, it's all love and light.
Yeah.
Just think positive vibes, man.
Yeah. Well, you could do that when you're out, on a piece of land with an earth ship, and you're there's going to be plenty of positive vibes. But yeah, I don't know. I just see like all the structures that we've relied on for a sense of stability and certainty are like obviously not coping with the complexity of the changing times of the internet and all the technology. And so, yeah, I definitely see COVID and even the protests and the riots seem sort of like the tip of the iceberg to me. And hopefully I'm wrong in some way, but that's kind of how it feels. And so for me, and also, even before that stuff, like, I personally, before COVID even hit, I was feeling this, like, deep sense of just, like, disconnection with what it means to be a human being, Like, all of these weird abstract things that we do to sustain our life. Like, okay, so I'm on a computer making a thing, and I send it to somebody, and they send me digital currency, and then I go and buy something from a store. I don't know the person at the store. Like so much of living is just abstraction, where I just started to feel like I want to go catch a fish and cook it, or have a garden, or all of these things that are just so basic to human life, like growing and hunting food, that we just seem to have put by the wayside, which I understand why. It's kind of a necessary step in development, but I feel like we're kind of getting to this crescendo with technology and abstraction, to where it's like, before we continue on this path, we kind of need to go back to the basics. You know what I mean? Like, heal some of our wounds, reorient to like why we're doing all this stuff. Like, why are we making faster and faster computers and crazy internet, and should we be doing it? And if we're going to do it, like, what's the point? You know what I mean? Like, because I feel like up until now, it's just pure momentum. Like, there's no intention behind why we're doing all this stuff. It's like, a lot of it is obviously like this individual success oriented, like capitalistic. And I'm not even trying to like hate on that stuff. It's just a part of, human development. But I feel like we're reaching a point where we're seeing the harms of that sort of motivation, and we kind of have to like change course and just regain some of these old ways, like things that even our grandparents did, like knowing how to can food and have a cellar and have chickens. And it's just like, which to me sounds awesome. So
yeah, I'm pretty much useless. If there was some of these places in the States right now look like war zones, look like dystopian. I mean, Portland for one, and the Kenosha, Wisconsin incident. I mean, it's crazy what's going on, and you're like, well, shit, I don't know how to like make a tourniquet, or I don't know. I don't have any like real world, tangible, actual, direct experience with altering my reality in harmony and symbiosis with like the earth and the environment. Like I don't have that. It's all abstraction. You're right. It's all abstraction. Now I'm learning it and I'm loving it. Like, and I think back about my upbringing, and it's like, I've always liked to do things with my hands. I'd always like to climb into a tree and, make something and do things like that. But yeah, this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I feel like I've noticed that your perspective is sort of aligned with my perspective a little bit, and there's a lot of other people that, there's so many different perspectives, but I guess like whatever you want to call what we're in, the psychedelic consciousness, spirituality thing, there's like some like techno-utopianism, there's some like, spiritual love and light, positive vibes kind of thing. And then there's sort of like where you and I are standing, and you put that meme up the other day, like that I liked, and it was like the government holding up their COVID story and stuff. Yeah. So it's like, because I was quite surprised, and I thought this was a dividing line. Like it was like, I was quite surprised, like I didn't know who to look to, because a lot of the people that I would like trusting and looking to for information were not really aligning with what I was kind of like feeling, the feeling that I was getting, and this sort of feeling that I always have, which is like, we live in a very like crazy place with a lot of crazy people that will do a lot of crazy things.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe you can like talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah.
And I'll just say, I know you've interviewed some people on your show too about this recently, right?
Yeah. Well, I would say quick before I touch on some of that stuff, I wanted to say that you're talking about these cities being like war zones, and to me, like this is obviously a big black hole to get into.
Yeah, let's dive into it.
But like, to me, it feels like with both COVID and the racial stuff, and I in no way want to downplay any like racial inequality or whatever, but to me, like these riots and these protests, because there's protests happening about coronavirus stuff too, and lockdowns, and there was protests happening before coronavirus, huge protests all over the world that people just didn't hear about. And like, from my perspective, this is all just symptoms of this change in human like value systems. I don't know if you're familiar with the work like spiral dynamics and stuff, but
I'm actually not. I know you brought that up. I was interested. Yeah, please share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this model called spiral dynamics, and I probably won't do a great job like giving a rundown of it, so I would encourage anybody who's interested to just check it out. I have a guy, Steve McDonald, come on my podcast. He's been on a couple times, and he'll be on again. He's kind of a friend, and he's out in Australia, and he's does a lot of work around spiral dynamics, and it's something where I think when you're kind of ready for it, it just blows your mind, and you just kind of really, it just resonates, like essentially it's the idea of that human, it's like a developmental psychology model. So it sounds kind of woo-woo with the name spiral, and like some of the, it can seem kind of like out there, but really it's a pretty grounded model of psychological development. And it works on an individual level, but also on a collective level. And it's basically just the idea that we move through these kind of set patterns of human development, different systems, value systems, starting as an infant where we're just based on survival and getting our basic needs met. And it progresses through kind of like a power dynamic stage where we really want to have, power over other people. And assert our individuality and our dominance. And it kind of continues forward to where we are now, which is layer 5 of this model, which is like an individualistic, like the Industrial Revolution was kind of like the start of this layer. And it's mostly based on like the biggest values are individual success, and having a lot of choices and like picking the best thing. And there are other qualities to it, but the most obvious one is this individual success oriented thing, which you can see all around us. I mean, Instagram is a great example of everybody is all about themselves, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's part of this journey. It's not about saying one layer is better than the other. They're all necessary. It's just like growing up. At a certain age, you learn certain skills. You kind of grow beyond those skills. You don't look back on them and say, well, that was stupid. Like learning how to eat from a spoon was stupid. You should eat from this other thing or whatever. But the idea is that so you've got basically two variables. You've got your life conditions and you've got your value system. And when they meet up, like when your value system is in harmony with the life conditions, you feel good, things feel in balance. But as your life conditions complexify, your value systems can't cope with the complexity of your life conditions. And you start to feel shitty and you don't really know why. You wake up one day and you kind of feel like crummy and you're just trying to think like, well, what's different, and lots of times what happens is people try to think back to a time when they used to feel good, and they'll think about old value systems. So you see this regression, which you see happening right now too. Like Make America Great Again is a perfect example of like, we need to go back. And even you and I, what we're talking about with coming up with these older things of like food preservation and gardening, that's sort of a similar deal of like looking back to older times when things worked better. So that's kind of a natural part, and that does fulfill some things, but it actually increases that tension because your life conditions are very complex, and instead of like moving forward to meet the life conditions, you're kind of going backwards and increasing the difference between the complexity. And so that kind of propels things forward even faster to the next set of values. Is this making sense at all?
So it propels things forward to the next set of values for yourself individually, or is this
it's
for
both.
The collective?
Yeah.
So it's like a feedback loop of both.
And so, there's all sorts of people around the world that are at different value systems right now. There are still people in the sort of like hunter-gatherer values, that layer still on the planet, but it kind of goes by the dominant paradigm, and the dominant paradigm is that layer 5, like industrial, personal, individual success kind of oriented layer. And so, but what we're moving towards is the layer 6, which based on the research of this guy, Claire W. Graves, who came up with this whole thing. And it's all research based. He studied all these students. He was a professor, and layer 6 value systems were shown to be all about like the number one important thing for layer 6 is deep human connection. So like people want to get off screens, they want to meet people in person, they want to meet face to face. They don't just want small talk, they want to connect deeply, they want to heal past trauma. They want to like decentralize. They want local agriculture, like things become localized. They're all about community. And so you kind of see that, you're seeing that like in some ways we're kind of being forced into it, I think, which I think will continue as these bigger systems fail. Mm-hmm. We'll have no choice but to connect with community, to form resilient communities to be able to get through this chaos,
Yeah.
So basically the idea is, he found 2 tiers in this system. And so the first 6 layers are part of this first tier of human development. And what he found was that after the first 6 tiers, there's like a jump that is monumental in human coping capacity from this layer 6 to layer 7. And layer 7 is like an integrated. So the first 6 layers alternate between left brain and right brain dominance and masculine and feminine type of energies. So like it goes from an individualistic based on one side, which would be like change the world to fit your preferences, to a communal based, which is change yourself to fit in with the community. And they alternate. So like we're going from now an individualistic based back to a communal based. It's sort of this jump from layer 6 still kind of has those themes to some extent from 6 to 7, but it's really about like you being able to utilize both hemispheres of the brain, sort of integrating masculine and feminine, being able to hold paradoxes, being able to understand like complex systems thinking. And so it really kind of takes human coping capacity to a whole new level, and the ability to like solve problems and actually see the layers in action. So looking at problems in the world, you don't just think like, God, what's up with these mega people? They're so stupid. Like you actually see, oh, they're functioning from this layer, and that's why they're feeling like this. And the only thing we can do to help them change is to actually change their life conditions, So for example, if people who are supporting Trump are actually doing so because they think he's going to help them get a job, then maybe the goal is to find some people meaningful work, not to like, criticize them for buying into a sleazy politician or whatever.
Right. So are these layers cyclical? Like and historical? Have we gone through these before?
Well, that's where it kind of gets interesting, and I don't know exactly what like people think about this. Like Steve, for example, like a lot of this is based on like you can map it out to like from hunter-gatherer civilizations to where we are now. But what I think is interesting is considering like, well, what about like ancient history, and what about alternative history, which is coming out more and more every day and being validated to have a large amount of accuracy, like pre-Diluvian, pre-flood civilizations, even like Atlantis. There's a lot of evidence for a civilization like Atlantis to have been like a real civilization. And so, who knows? It would be pure speculation, obviously, but I don't know. It would make sense to me if like these older civilizations were actually like a tier in somewhere on the tier 2 type level, where they were functioning just at a totally different level, and these catastrophes like the floods actually sort of kind of reset everything, and we kind of had to restart through that whole journey. But
yeah, it kind of reminds me of Michio Kaku's like type 0, type 1 civilization, and the stages, and there's a lot of different. Recently I was rereading Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. He talks about Timothy Leary's 8-circuit model of consciousness, the biosurvival circuit, and and then there's the integral thinkers, and they're Jeremy Johnson, who I was talking to the other day, and it's just like, man, that guy just blows my mind. I don't know how to I can't keep up with him.
Some of that integral stuff actually ties in spiral dynamics. So like Ken Wilber, he took the spiral dynamics model and added his own kind of flair to it. So yeah, I would definitely check it out. I think you would really like it because it's, on one hand, like there are people that theorize around it or whatever, but really it's not even a theory. It's basically just an evidence-based thing, which, I mean, I'm sure people would have arguments against it, but I don't know. It really resonates with me, and you can just see it play out, and it really helps you kind of understand like what's going on in the world.
I think that's really, really helpful. I mean, I recently did a solo podcast called Reality Tunnels, and where I was sort of touching on a similar kind of thing, but without any knowledge of this stuff. And I guess maybe coming from other places, I always find it pretty interesting that sometimes I can arrive at a place, or anybody can arrive at a place that's kind of similar to the arrival that somebody else gets to, but just with a different set, different models, and different information.
Definitely.
So it's like there's definitely, that kind of makes me feel like there's some truth to it.
Exactly.
It's like, wow, we're all kind of like chipping at the same block, just in different locations or with different tools.
Exactly. And that's why it's funny, because I start to hear people say things about, oh yeah, like we need decentralized currency, or we need, all these things. And it's like, oh yeah, that's like layer 6, you can just start to see it around you. And even like the reality tunnels thing, like that whole concept of how we're all feeling like everybody's living in a different reality, like not everybody, but, like you and I probably have similar perceptions about this whole COVID situation. And then there's other people, even that I know you and I are close to, or have, communicated with through the podcast, that might see things like completely different. But it's like, to them, that's their reality too, and in some ways this whole, like, I don't think that's all because of this layers thing from the spiral dynamics, but that's one example of how you can see that, like, when people are functioning at different value systems, they see the world completely different, like they emphasize different things. Like, from one thing that you can kind of see happening is people are so isolated from this individualistic oriented way of living that, and all these, like, I think past traumas and things are coming up for people, that it feels so dangerous to be like canceled, pushed out of community and extricated by your tribe, that you will change your opinions and your beliefs to fit with what other people think you should believe, just so that you're not put into that situation that feels like potential death. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do know what you're trying to say. Yeah. And I've definitely felt this myself, and I didn't even realize that I was feeling it, because I sort of had this idea. I came from a political podcast that I did, and I was very like hardcore libertarian. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would still sort of identify with that sort of general core ethos, but not like the party or anything like that. And I went from being like a militant, aggressive, atheist libertarian to like traveling through the psychedelic consciousness milieu and taking different parts and plugging it in. But there was a part of me that goes, okay, like I want to, Charles Eisenstein does a great job of this. I think this is why I admire him a lot, is because he's able to really sort of put a lot of ideas out there that I resonate with and that I believe in, but he doesn't do it in a way where he's like beating you over the head with it.
Yeah.
And that was something that I had to sort of navigate through. And I think to overcompensate for that, I was like, well, I don't want to say this because that could be too aggressive. So, and then I'll be like shunned, so it's kind of figuring out the mode of communication and the style of information dissemination. With stepping on eggshells sometimes a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like, something that I've found, and I still don't feel super confident to put all my deepest, opinions and beliefs out there. And sometimes I don't even know what they
neither do I, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm just an idiot.
Yeah.
That's my it's just like, I'm willing to make a fool out of myself.
Yeah. But something that I think has helped me feel a little bit more willing to like kind of risk it, is just like having a good community around you in real life, like in actual human space, like to have
RL,
to have like deep, close bonds with friends and stuff, because then like, hey, if I get ridiculed on the internet or I get canceled by this online community, like I still have my friends, like, and I think being kind of isolated in a city on your own or something can make that a little more tough, like you maybe are more willing to bend to fit the narrative because, you don't want to feel like, hey, I'm getting kind of like kicked out of the tribe,
Yeah.
But yeah, the COVID stuff has just been like so weird. So like mind-blowing for me to see I mean, just to be frank, like the idea that people are still taking it so seriously is kind of a hard thing for me to wrap my head around sometimes.
But is it though, or like because I guess I kind of know where you're coming from with that. It's like really guys, really, like we're still, but considering the history of psychological warfare, narrative warfare, mass manipulation, propaganda, deep state, CIA, COINTEL, all this craziness. It's like, man, there's a lot of crazy shit happening out there, and a lot of people are just busy working and busy enjoying their life that they don't have time to be aware. Yeah, they're not awake, aware, and they're not really
barely alive.
Yeah, but they think they are.
Yeah,
to some degree, and so that's the part of it where I used to get mad a lot. I used to be like, "Damn it! Like, what the fuck? Like, why is this happening? Why are so many people buying into this?" But then you see it. You see how quickly it became so normal.
Yeah.
Within weeks of the pandemic, it was like just that repetitive, stay home, stay home, stay home, wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. And now it's just like, it's just everywhere you go.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, I've gone down the deepest rabbit holes. I mean, I'm sure you could find some slightly deeper stuff, but I've definitely gone to the points where like I feel super paranoid, And then you kind of allow yourself to feel that and you release it. And then you can kind of like see more clearly, and you can take certain things that actually make sense, and you can leave certain things that are probably just pure paranoid nonsense, like, and so you get into the stuff where people...
It's fun being paranoid.
You get into the stuff where people are talking about like every movie and every TV show is pure just like predictive programming to try to prepare us for such and such. And I think there is some truth to that. Like, I don't think it's all like that, by no means. And I think some of it is just collective unconscious, subconscious things coming out. But there definitely is real, like, there are, Operation Mockingbird style, like, they've proven, I'm sure there's Pentagon people, CIA people working within the entertainment industry that put certain ideas in. And so just the other day I was watching an episode of Parks and Rec. I hadn't seen it before, so I was kind of been watching through some of those seasons, and there was an episode where they had an emergency preparedness drill, and it was all about like an outbreak of a virus. And like that's some of how I think people are so hooked, is like this has been pushed for so long, whether it's collective unconscious stuff or whether it's predictive programming or probably some combination of both in certain ways. But this idea of like some scary novel virus spreading over the earth and wiping out tons of people has just been like put into people's minds so heavily, and that's not to say that there is never any outbreak of, diseases, but, if this was half of what they said it would have been at the start, or even half of what people are still kind of like acting like it would be, we would see people around us like dying and being hospitalized. And I'm sure there was plenty of people who would just like rip me apart for even saying this right now.
Oh yeah.
Because they're like, oh yeah, well I saw so-and-so go to the hospital or whatever. But it just seems to me like some of what I'm seeing is been like almost like a marketing campaign. Mm-hmm. Like taking things that normally happen, which is people dying every day, thousands of people dying every day of respiratory illnesses and flu-like illnesses.
Yeah.
And basically...
I think fourth leading cause of death, I think.
And like remarketing it, rebranding it and putting it out as though it's like some super novel thing that nobody's ever seen before, and every day there's a different symptom, and very non-linear warfare type news coverage of like every day there's some like conflicting thing. Masks are good, masks aren't good, the tests are accurate, the tests are super inaccurate, like there's this symptom, there's that symptom, asymptomatic people spread it, oh no they don't, oh yeah they do, it's like that feels very I mean, maybe it's all just a coincidence, but it feels very like deliberate, like a non-linear warfare type tactic of just like confusing the population so nobody knows what to believe, you know?
Yes, totally. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely an element of controlled opposition, or many elements of controlled opposition going on, because when you can keep people just prey on people's emotions, spin them up, and throw out in immense amount of complexity, you know, then you're paralyzed with, it's like, well, what do I believe? Or I'm just going to go with the easiest thing, or whatever my group is doing, or whatever the people are saying on the news, or whatever, something like that. And so it is tricky too, because what you're saying and what I'm saying, it's like, I'm not saying that this thing isn't real. I mean, maybe it's not. I don't know. But like, you know, then you have people like Kelly Brogan and Sayer G and Dr. Kaufman, and, you know, they're talking about germ theory and terrain theory, and Dr. Thomas Cowan, and then and then he's getting debunked, and then there's the fact check. So it's this crazy amount of confusion. But, you know, you're right to a certain degree. It's like, you know, you go outside, it reminds me of this famous Bill Hicks joke.
Yeah.
Where, you know what I'm talking about?
I know
where he's
exactly.
like, war, death, terror, AIDS, famine, war, death. And you open your front door and it's like, where's all this shit happening, man?
Yeah.
You know? Like, if no one said there's a pandemic happening and no one was wearing masks, I wouldn't know anything was going on.
That's exactly my point. And it's like, you think that years ago they had to tell people there was a pandemic? No, you knew because your family was getting carted off. And not that we should just let it get to the point where all these people are dying, but I'm just trying to make the point that, like, if something was serious was going on, we wouldn't be confused about it and having to rely on like news stories to tell us. Like, we would know. It would be pretty obvious, I think. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
And I have gotten into a lot of that germ theory versus terrain theory stuff, and that's what David Crow, who I had on my podcast, he's been studying scientific papers on viruses and stuff for years, and he actually has a lot of compelling evidence showing that there's not a lot of super hard evidence to link viruses to a lot of these things that were, purported to be viruses, like HIV and measles, and it's controversial, and a lot of people probably just think it's totally ridiculous. And if you look it up on Google, I mean, there's going to be tons of stuff saying, no, it's bullshit, it's this, it's that. And I struggled with that stuff for a while, but I'm kind of getting to a point where, like, I don't really care anymore, like, if you find stuff that claims to debunk it, because the more you think about it and look at this stuff, like, imagine even just like, okay, let's say a virologist says that it's bullshit. Well, that virologist went to school, spent tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands, to study with textbooks that already had a certain paradigm in it. You know, all of their peers believe the same stuff. You're funded by certain organizations, and none of this is necessarily intentional. It's just the way things work. You know, there's a certain paradigm that people exist in and the way they see the world. And if you've committed that much of your life to that, I'm pretty sure it's probably pretty hard to just like go completely against it and have a different opinion, you know? And I think if you look throughout history, every time there's been a paradigm shift, there's all sorts of people calling it heresy, and there's been people killed for having opinions that go against the grain. But when I've dug into this like terrain theory stuff, like, it just really resonates with me personally, and it's a way that I would like to see the world. And I do believe that we, like, our collective belief is kind of what creates our reality. Yeah. And so it's like, why not believe something that is more in line with like what feels right? And so I don't know how much you've gotten into that stuff, but the basic idea, as I understand it, is like, you know, a lot of what we think is causing these diseases is like showing up to a fire and seeing fire trucks and going, oh, every time I show up to a burning building, there's a fire truck. It must be the fire trucks causing these fires, you know? And so the idea is we've taken this genetic material that we call viruses that can be produced in our cells, is in our bodies all the time. They've done studies that have shown like a lot of people have HIV in them, normal people that are completely healthy with nothing wrong. So people can have all sorts of different genetic material that we've associated with these diseases and be totally fine. Just like we can have all sorts of bacteria in us that are associated with diseases and be totally fine. Like we all have E. coli, but you don't consider yourself to be infected with E. coli right now.
Right.
And so that in and of itself makes a ton of sense to me. And it's like, well, yeah, all these people that are testing positive for this genetic material that they're calling coronavirus, but they have no symptoms whatsoever. They're perfectly healthy. Why would we consider them to be sick or infected, Like, that seems to be jumping to conclusions. And the idea is basically that these microbes don't cause diseases. These microbes are responses to environmental imbalances.
Right.
So, like, your cells can create and excrete things to respond to conditions in your body. Like, they can create bacteria and viruses and fungi and to respond to different conditions. So the idea is like, yeah, if there's environmental toxicity, which we have plenty of right now Zach Bush has done a great job with like...
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, showing the map of the COVID outbreaks on top of the map of glyphosate spraying and air pollution, and the spots where we've had the worst COVID outbreaks have been the spots where there's the worst air pollution and the highest amount of glyphosate spraying,
Yeah. Yeah, I know I'm going to get like tons of messages from people who are going to be like, this is bullshit. Like, it's been proven this. I can't believe you're saying this.
Yeah.
I got a couple messages from like some podcasts before. There's like, I can't believe you're putting out this. This is dangerous. You're going to destroy the psychedelic community or something with what you're saying. And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm really surprised at the sort of whatever community you want to call it, the sort of woke community or the conscious community or whatever, to be so reliant upon the sort of monolithic, scientific reductionist medical model that is embedded with the big pharma, all these big organizations. And like you said, like with the terrain theory model, it's like that can be debunked with these institutions of higher education that through their sort of curated reality tunnel have indoctrinated people. And we're all indoctrinating people, like where everybody's being indoctrinated. It's just you can't not be.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's like, and I think Charles made this point. I remember when he was on my podcast, he was like, some debates you can't win even if you have the truth, because you'll be knocked out by the sort of the hard logic of the studies that these people have and the sort of reinforcement of their thing. But then it's always like, well, then where do we come in? Does all of our power just go away to the experts, or like, do we have any intuition and do we have any say in this? And I think we should. We do. We should be autonomous beings that should be able to take care of ourselves. So that's where I'm most surprised, is in the so-called free thinking, open, psychedelic conscious community, that more people aren't questioning this and more people are taking the side of. And I know a lot of people are. A lot of people are
for sure.
But there's a lot of people that I'm like, oh, really? You're just taking like the dominant scientific model?
I agree. It's been surprising, and a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, I think, really gets connected and pigeonholed with like, it gets connected with far right stuff, and Trump and anti-vax, and which. Yeah, which I think in and of itself is a tactic, obviously,
Totally.
But yeah, I've been surprised about that too. But I think, what I appreciate about talking to you right now, and what I've kind of been trying to do in general, is like, it's not my job to convince anybody of anything. Like, I'm looking for my own truth, and I want to find other people that I resonate with, and I will talk to people that don't agree with me or that I don't agree with, and that's totally fine, and we can coexist having differing opinions. But when it comes to somebody else's beliefs being imposed upon me, so now I'm supposed to do what you want me to do because you're scared of of a virus or whatever, that's being looked at now as selfish and not having compassion. But to me, it's like, you know, if anybody who knows me knows that, like, I care so much about other people and about wanting people to be healthy and happy, and my compassion towards other people is to want us all to not wear masks and to hug and to, you know, talk to each other in person, and to, like, I think it's so important that we not be afraid of each other and afraid of our own bodies and afraid of life itself. And so that's just a different form of compassion. I don't think it means you're selfish if you disagree with masks. And just because somebody might not be able to articulate why they disagree with masks, or they might, you know, come off like they're just pissed off. Like, I don't think it's all just like crazy conspiracy theory people that are upset that these rules are being forced upon them, you know? Like, I think there's a lot of really compassionate, intelligent people that maybe just sometimes don't know exactly how to articulate how they feel, you know?
Yeah, but they feel it. And that's the thing. And
Yep.
and like you were saying, if you know me, you would know. And a lot of the isolation, lockdown, Zoom, social media stuff, it's like, it's kind of hard to get to know people from a tweet and Instagram post. And especially when we're not gathering together and you can't, you know, sort of like vibe off of the other person's energy and sort of get their sort of, you know, aura that they're putting out there, and the nuance, you know, that is in, you know, you brought up anti-vax before, and it's like, yeah, and look, I'm sure there's problems with vaccines.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm sure there's a lot of sketchy stuff. Have some vaccines helped people? Yeah, I'm sure they probably have, but maybe a lot of them have hurt people.
Yep.
You know, like, let's be open to asking questions. And that's one of the things where I see that there's just like a tremendous breakdown. But there is also just these pockets, like I'm able to connect with you and we're able to talk, and we're sort of, you know, thinking of similar things in terms of gardening and getting back to the land and think more things like that. But that also is to say that I'm not thinking of like ditching technology and being a Luddite either.
Here,
Yeah, it's the integration, I think, that we're looking for, the balance.
Exactly. And like, you know, what you're saying is kind of what I was trying to get at, which is like, I am really realizing that the answer to, I think, almost all the problems we're facing is not about trying to fight anything. It's just about creating a new thing. You know what I mean? And there might be some resistance towards that, which we'll deal with when we come to it. You know, if like we can't go to the store because we don't have our COVID vaccine or something, like, then things get tricky and we really have to create our own thing. But, you know, like the Buckminster Fuller quote of, you don't change things by, you know, trying to, I don't even remember exactly what it is. But
yeah, don't change things by fighting the existing power structure. Build something that makes it obsolete.
Yeah, exactly.
Love that.
And I just really think that right now is more accurate than ever. Even with things like, you know, some of the social justice stuff, like it's all about fighting against stuff, which I understand, and there's maybe there is a place for a certain level of that fighting against, because I do get pumped when I see big COVID protests too, you know, like, but that being said, I think like really the reason people have power over us is because we give it to them, you know, and us not being able to feed ourselves and fix our own things, and that's the type of stuff of why we're so able to be controlled, you know. And I think some of the most powerful things we can do is probably regain some of that sovereignty, you know, food sovereignty. And I mean, my buddy is building an Earth ship, and I don't know how familiar you are with those, but you start looking into those and it's just like, man, this is the way it should be, you know, like, why are we still doing things the way we're doing them? You know, like these Earth ships are built to be sustainable and collect water and be solar powered and geothermally heated and all of this stuff, to where it's like the solutions I think are already all here, you know, to most of the problems that we face, like regenerative agriculture, Earth ships, cryptocurrency, I'm sure could be of value, all of these different things. But I think it's just about like we're waiting for them to be instituted on a large scale by people who we perceive as authority figures, when it's like, it's sort of like, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. You know what I mean? Like we should just start doing this shit. And you know,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the only way that it happens. I know, you know, Howard Zinn's famous quote of, you know, real democracy in action doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up, you know, and I don't know, I have my own problems with democracy, as being like, I don't really think it's synonymous with individual liberty or empowerment. I think it's this kind of nice notion of fairness, but it gets used a lot as but anyway, but really, it does come from the spontaneous collaboration and cooperation of like voluntary and willing participants, and I think that is what it is. We've been so used to, and myself included, like the other day, I was just like, man, like I order from Amazon Prime, like maybe I shouldn't, like I feel like this conflict, and it's like trying to detach from the world that I think contributes and perpetuates the sort of, dependent, the dependency model for us being dependent upon these larger institutions and these centralized powers and these experts and authority figures. Yeah. And it's like, man, every psychedelic experience that I've had, every wonderful moment in nature that I had has made me feel in touch with myself and my own power. And then that combined with other people who are aligned with that. And it's like, man, we can do amazing things when people are coming together like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, the Amazon thing. I feel that too. I don't like go crazy on Amazon, but I definitely use it. And I've had conflicting feelings about that too, because it's like I'm kind of feeding the beast here, and that's what I've been all about for quite a while, is this sort of Ram Dass kind of idea of various people, not just Ram Dass, but the idea that like a lot of what we see around us is just projections of things that we haven't dealt with inside of ourselves, and so a lot of this stuff that people are so pissed about, like hating Jeff Bezos and hating Amazon, which I understand. And I went through that sort of phase too, of like, I loved Bernie Sanders and I love that sort of stuff. But when you really start to think about it too, it's like, well, how can I hate this thing if I'm like using it all the time, and like it is benefiting me and I didn't help create this. Like there is the idea of like, we all are one human race. And so we all kind of have some part in the pie of like human innovation, but at the same time, like there is this feeling of like, I don't think hating Jeff Bezos is going to solve any of our problems, and like lynching this guy because now he's the enemy is just like what Charles Eisenstein talks about it's always a new enemy and a new like warfare tactic of the war on viruses, the war on drugs. And it's like, when are we going to finally like turn inside and like try to, where's the Jeff Bezos inside of me that's, running some little tyrannical Amazon? And can I like heal that somehow and share the wealth a little bit? And I do think there's a place for something like Amazon, like if you're getting all sorts of stuff locally, like you're locally farming and you're collaborating with people in your local community, but then you're able to order various like supplements or tools or things from like a more I guess you could say centralized, but almost decentralized too, in terms of like they have these facilities kind of placed around the country that store a lot of goods, and like it kind of makes sense. Like it's just about, I think, really like the balance and integration like we talked about before, like it's not about just saying like fuck technology and let's not use laptops or not just go back to being Amish or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's like regaining some of these things that we've just kind of lost and integrating them and using things like more with purpose and intention, rather than just like mindlessly,
Totally. I think that's so much of the key is your intention behind what you're doing and the choices that you're making. I think oftentimes people ask me like, is this good or is this bad? I'm like, well, it really depends on like what you're bringing to it and why you're doing it and those sorts of things. And I love what you said about where's the Jeff Bezos inside of me. It's like, I think that scares the shit out of people. And I think that's why there's so much of that projection as well. You know, I think oftentimes whenever I find myself in a situation where I'm getting angry, bitter, jealous, or resentful at somebody or something outside of me, it takes me some time, like it takes me a little bit to be like, oh yeah. You know, usually when I'm like high, cannabis is so great for that for me. Like it just brings me back into that introspective place where I go, oh, I was being like, okay, I see. I was being that, and that's why I was getting mad at them. And it's like, you see the same thing with Trump or whoever. It's like, you know, these people that hate the thing. It's like, this is the thing that I hate. And yeah, like, and then it's like to even consider or to even suggest, hey, where's the little Trump inside of you?
Yeah.
It's like, what, are you kidding me? I'm nothing like this person, you know?
Yeah, the Trump one has been one that I've just like, I've found myself defending Trump and Trump supporters like so many times. And it's not because I like Trump at all. Like I don't support really any politician. Like I love Tulsi Gabbard. Andrew Yang's got some cool ideas, and I really liked Bernie Sanders. Tulsi was probably my favorite, but just the whole idea that we need some like mommy or daddy figure in some weird political place to like run our lives for us is just kind of odd. I've probably come around more to a somewhat of a libertarian vibe, like you in some ways, which I never would have thought. But even to say that is not accurate. I'm just really not. I just don't identify that much with political parties or ideas in general. But
yeah,
but what was I saying there?
About the
What were?
Oh, about the Trump inside.
Oh yeah. So the Trump thing, I don't know. It's just so weird to me. I don't know if it was because I had been like so into political corruption for so long, like researching it, and like Obama dropped more bombs than every other president before him combined, I think. Like so many at one point they ran out of bombs, you know, and he was the highest deportation like ever. And so to see this other dude come along that just sent nasty tweets and talked about like, you know, grabbing women by the pussy or whatever, which is obviously not cool, but it was just more about like, hey, it's the idea that this guy is like despicable more than like the actual stuff, you know, because people loved Obama, but I think part of why they loved him is because they could just put it on cruise control and not pay attention to what was going on. They felt good. He made them feel good, you know, like, oh yeah. It's very much like we were like parentified, or like we're like children, you know, like we need our parent, and Obama had a very good like parent vibe that made people feel comfortable. Like I hear people talking so much about we need good leadership, we need better leadership. It's like, why do we need leadership? You know, like can't we lead ourselves? Like, and from my like perspective at this point, I feel like a lot of that comes from is actually like we all carrying around so much childhood trauma, and we've never really healed that enough to grow into like autonomous, sovereign adults. Yeah. And so we are all kind of looking for this like father figure or mother figure kind of, and a lot of that is projected onto celebrities, scientists, religious figures, political figures. And it's scary to reclaim your own sovereignty is what I've been finding, like doing a lot of like inner child kind of healing involuntarily myself over the past year or so. And it's like a terrifying process to reconnect with like these childhood fears of abandonment and all of this stuff. And so I don't blame people for, you know, kind of holding that stuff in. I think most of us don't even know that it's there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that I think a lot of people, you know, it's almost like we would like this to be that we would like this information to be more like mainstream, and I think it sort of is happening in some aspects, in some regards. I think, you say trauma or PTSD or healing or even, psychedelic therapy now. And I think more and more people are sort of like, yeah, I have heard something about that, or I get something like that. But I think it is coming from it's coming from the margins, it's coming from the fringes, it's coming from the decentralized, podcasts and YouTube channels and Instagram pages. And so it's just coming in all these different points. And it's instead of coming from like this top down, it's coming from this like more horizontal way. And I think it's good. It's a good thing. I think a lot of people are catching on more, and I think that's what it's going to take, is just kind of, that way. But yeah, I was thinking of what you were saying before about Obama and Trump and just how, like, to kind of shift back to that, I like it's almost like we enjoy like a magic show, like you like to go to a magic show and suspend your disbelief and be amazed. And like Obama was such a good magician. Like he was just like a great orator, like he's, charismatic, sleek, and he came out there and he was like, boom, like doing all these magic tricks, and people were just like, wow, this is so sleek and smooth and cool. But then you're not seeing what's happening behind the scenes so much. Whereas Trump comes out and he's more like a polarizing, like, I don't know, David Blaine kind of guy, like jams a nail in his head and you're just like, oh, this is terrible. What is this? It's like, he's not classy, he's crude. He's not giving us the show that we, those type of people. Because I mean, every president, as far as I'm concerned, has been horrific. Like the institution of the presidency, the whole thing. But it's like I think that we like the show. We like to be sort of fooled to a certain degree. Like we don't want to know. Just give us the guy who's polished and nice, and we don't really want to know about the other stuff.
Well, it's kind of like, when something's wrong with your car, and so you just turn the radio up. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to have to face like bringing it in, finding out how much it's going to cost. Having to rent a car for a week while it's getting fixed, or borrow somebody's car, or ride the bus to work, or whatever. And I get that. I think we all have that sense of just like, no, just wait a little bit longer. I don't want to deal with this quite yet. And I think Trump and a lot of these things that are coming up, COVID and the racial protests and all of this stuff, is that sort of like reckoning moment of just like, no, it's been long enough. Like, you got to figure this shit out, And, with the Trump stuff, like, I come from a small town in rural Minnesota, like North Branch, Minnesota, 45 minutes out of the city. It's factory workers, farmers, hunters. And so like I'm very familiar with the type of people that are in the Trump supporter groups. And there's a lot of Trump supporters around the area where I'm from. But I also lived in the city for a long time, and I've always been a different type of person, and have been in podcast circles and used to skateboard, and I'm a musician. So like I've also been exposed to a lot of liberal, upper middle class, that type of city life as well. So I feel like I kind of see both sides. And I think one of the things that a lot of, whatever you want to call it, liberal city people, upper middle class, woke people, a lot of the things that they miss is that like, that these people who have been supporting Trump, like they've been hurting for a long time, because all these factory jobs that used to pay people good money have been slowly closing down, and farmers are struggling, and like these people have been getting hit economically hard for a long time. And under Obama, that's, people think that all of the problems with Obama are about his race or whatever, and certainly that they talked about that a lot on Fox News and all of this stuff. But I think the larger problem, even if people thought it was race, I think that was just an instinctual feeling underneath, being like, I need to be able to feed my family and support my family, and I want a decent job. You know what I mean? Like sometimes what people say they're upset with, like we talked about earlier with the masks, like some people just don't know how to articulate what's actually going on inside of them. But from my perspective, it's people who are seeing that these systems aren't working anymore. They're not able to get good jobs like they used to get. You know, they see all this business going to foreign countries. Everything's produced in China. You know, the whole thing with Detroit, all the car manufacturing places closed, and they just unfortunately got duped by a guy who said he wanted to help them, you know, and for certain reasons that resonated with them. And he mixes in some truth with what he says. I think that's why so many people get hooked, even with the QAnon stuff. Like, I think the QAnon is like a genius psyop, you know. It's like you mix in enough truth to make people think that this dude's an actual crusader that's trying to take down the deep state, you know. And so it's like you convince Trump supporters that Trump's trying to take down the deep state, and you convince like liberal, I hate to use that word, whatever, non-Trump supporters that the deep state is just some wacky right-wing conspiracy theory and it's all a bunch of nut jobs, when it's like the truth is in the middle, that there is a deep state, there is a shadow government, and there probably is all sorts of pedophile rings and human trafficking, and you know what I mean? Like, but it gets co-opted to be used to just keep the whole two-sided back and forth thing going, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. I mean, it totally makes sense, because you can really, you know, as far as conspiracy theories go, it's really easy to just ridicule and dismiss people, because the range of conspiracy theories go from, you know, lizard people living in the center of the earth to the earth being flat to like maybe JFK was killed by his own government, or, you know, like these, you know, just as an example. But it's like some things are true, but the ones that are so outlandish just get lumped in with all the true stuff, and then those people can be dismissed and ridiculed. And just like, I mean, even with the COVID stuff, it's like, oh, you're a COVID truther.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I did like 9/11 truther. It's like, when did the truth become this you know, pejorative?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, truther is a pejorative. Oh, okay, interesting. And so it's an interesting flip to see that kind of thing going on. But yeah, I think that most people really just want to have a good life and live a good life and like be happy and peaceful and have a good time with their families and their friends and eat good food and have fun and enjoy as much as they possibly can while we're here on this limited, you know, earth. And I think I would get pretty pissed off too if I moved out to a rural area and all of a sudden there was like a bunch of people marching through my neighborhood and, you know, chanting and throwing things. Like, I'd be like, hey, you know, I don't know, you know, we are all connected, but we also get to have our little spaces too.
Yeah, the whole truther as a pejorative thing is just, if you know, for anybody who's done any research into public relations, you know, I've one of the documentaries, and I know I probably mentioned this on the isolation tank and stuff. I know Jen Sodini is a big proponent of this one as well. It's the Century of Self. I feel like for anybody who hasn't gotten into conspiracy theory stuff, that's a great place to start, because it's very fact-based. Like, it's not conspiracy. But once you learn about Edward Bernays and this PR stuff and how the government and the CIA and stuff has used this public relations to manipulate the masses into going to war for certain things, and even just for companies, like to convince people to get diamond rings for weddings. It was a complete invention by a public relations guy. And once you kind of learn about that stuff, it really just opens the door to like, wow, I can see now how like Truthers was probably just like basically a PR campaign to say, how do we get people to stop like questioning, you know, 9/11? Well, let's just call them truthers. 9/11 truthers. We'll run all sorts of stories about how nutty they are and connect them to other things tangentially. Like the same with like COVID stuff. It gets connected with all this weird stuff, you know, like, it's okay now denying not denying, questioning COVID gets tied in with QAnon or gets tied in with Trump, and they've done that, in my opinion, most likely intentionally in a really genius way to have Trump say things that make it seem like he is questioning COVID and that he's, kind of skeptical of it. And so then it makes people who are skeptical of it, like us, potentially could be tied with Trump. Like, oh, we must support Trump if we're also questioning COVID.
Yeah, well, fuck Trump. And the thing is that it's like, whatever happened, why is questioning bad?
Right.
I don't. Yeah.
Well, because it's dangerous, Mike. We could be endangering people's lives if we're getting them to question COVID, so then they don't wear masks, and then, oh, what if they get sick? And, I think that's the basic idea, right?
Yeah, I know. It's just that it would, science is supposed to be questioning.
Yeah.
Science is supposed to be pushing the envelope, asking questions, coming up with theories. It's supposed to be doing that. I mean, we should always be doing that. I always try and espouse the Timothy Leary, don't trust anyone, and question everything. Mm-hmm. I think it's healthy to a certain degree as long as it doesn't go into extreme paranoia, and, but yeah, I think, and what I've experienced is a lot of times if you're asking questions, then there's an immediate assumption, like you were saying, that you must be on a particular side or a particular team. And then the reaction or the defense isn't necessarily something that's that would be an invitation to have more of a discourse about, and have a dialogue about. It's more of just oh, really? Really? Is that what you think? Really? That's what you think?
Yeah.
And it's well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just questioning it. And I think that it's let's not pretend that it's out of the realm of possibility. I think that's one of the most infuriating things, is to be oh, really? You think it's a deep state psyop thing? It's it's quite possible and most likely.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, if you look at the history, Operation Northwoods, Operation Mockingbird, Operation Paperclip, I mean, these things are declassified. COINTELPRO, this stuff. And so many more, and then ones that we don't know about.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's enough documented, verifiable stuff out there to just not really take anything off the table, in my opinion.
Right.
And I think sometimes what is scary to really accept, and what maybe goes past some people, is so Bill Gates, for example. I don't think he's an enemy either that we need to rally against. Okay, Bill Gates is now the bad guy and we need to fight against him or whatever. But I do think he's a super sketchy guy, and there's so much verifiable stuff that you can find about him. What's his name? The Corbett report. I can't remember.
Corbett, yeah, James
Corbett. He did a great 4-part series on Bill Gates.
Who is Bill Gates? Yeah, I saw that.
Super good. And with the amount of money a dude like that has and pours into the media, if you hear him on a TV show talking about trying to debunk conspiracy theories about him and denying whatever and talking about the vaccine, it's I think people don't understand that he can just buy time on shows, and he can have them ask him certain questions and basically just do what he wants because he's funding this stuff. You know what I'm trying to say?
Totally, yeah. Yeah, you could put him on there with Trevor Noah, who's the young kind of hip comedy guy, and he's, oh yeah, that's crazy talking. Trevor Noah's yeah, can you believe some people believe this? I mean, isn't this crazy? And they're oh yeah, it's crazy. And it's I've definitely seen that before too. When Hillary Clinton was on Ellen, she's to bring something about Epstein or something like that, and she was oh, that's just crazy talk or whatever. Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's yeah, this is what they do. It's, and then you have people just associate, well, she's on Ellen, so she must be good. Oh, he was on Colbert and he was on Trevor Noah, so it's probably fine. All this other stuff is just wacky.
Yeah. And it's well, what? All these hosts are just going to be in on it? And it's well, no, but they're not going to go against their bosses, you know what I mean? Because the people who cut their checks, you know, if they're funded by pharmaceutical industries and, you know, military contractors and all of this stuff, like there's going to be certain things that you can't say or you're going to get fired, you know? And I think we've seen how a lot of people that have a strong desire to be relevant, to be famous, be in positions of public, you know, spotlights, like lots of times they can have insecurities just like everybody else, and they want to be liked and they want to have this like prestigious position, so they're willing to like go with the narrative just to like ensure their salary and, you know, make sure that they can kind of stay in that position, you know, or keep climbing the ladder or whatever, which is totally human. I can understand how that happens, you know. It doesn't all have to be some, you know, I think some of the things that I've seen going around is this idea that like it's either complete chaos or it's complete grand conspiracy. Like the idea that it's like, well, there's no way it could be all just a giant grand conspiracy, and that's like it must be like total chaos. And it's like it can be both. Like it can be somewhere in the middle, you know. Like there's plenty of like some of the COVID stuff, for example, like if the CDC and the World Health Organization from the top down put out a certain method of, say, tracking deaths or whatever, that then gets filtered down to all of these other hospitals and organizations. And so many people, as we've seen with masks and everything, like they're just willing to do, I mean, even myself, like I wear masks in Minneapolis because it's required down here because that's what they tell me to do, you know what I mean? And so it's the same sort of thing. Like it doesn't take a lot for people of power to influence the masses by just simply putting out a memo from the CDC about how to, you know, code deaths or whatever. And I know a dude that's talked about that is Scott Jensen here in Minnesota. A senator has pushed back on the death coding, how they were basically incentivizing people to mark things as COVID death more than anything else, even underlying conditions. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he got investigated just for talking about that and was, you know,
that kind of tells you something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like one of my favorite quotes is from, I think it was Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg trials after World War II, like one of, you know, Hitler's top guys in command, and being questioned about the war acts, and one of the quotes that he put out was like, look, people can be brought to do anything. If you tell them they're being attacked, they'll be afraid, and you can move them to any position. He's like, it works in every country, everywhere. It doesn't matter. All you have to do is do that, and then denounceify the pacifists for lack of patriotism and for not caring about people's health and security. And it's like, well, like, you know, and Bernays was a major influence in the Nazi Third Reich. You know, that was like the playbook, you know, for them almost, among many other things, right? So it's like, let's not pretend like that power structures and institutions that have a lot of profit and power to gain aren't, you know, interested in these sorts of tactics. Like, and that's not, and this is where it becomes complex, because you're like, well, you know, I know someone, or I know, you know, it's like, yeah, everybody has a story where they know someone that works for the government, or, you know, is a nurse or a doctor or something like that, but it's compartmentalized. Like they're not in on it. Right. They're just doing their job, and they're not given the information.
Right. And it's like, well, I could work at McDonald's and be a really good person, but that doesn't mean I have any control over like McDonald's philosophy and how they do business, and you know what I mean? So
yeah,
and a lot of people are just willing to go along with things, you know, because everybody, I think in some ways comes back to like, it might sound like a weird connection, but I think that comes back to the inner child stuff too, and in the like childhood trauma and wounds that we carry. Is like, we're all like we've been very heavily bought into like a scarcity mentality, you know, and that's part of the individualistic nature that we've had, is like, we're kind of all out for ourselves in some way, and out for like, you know, a lot of us have taken comfortable jobs for a long time to have that security. You know, we've got car insurance, we've got health insurance, we've got, you know, there's a overarching theme, I think, in our, as we've grown up in this society, has been all about like comfort and security. And it's like a false sense of security. And I think that's starting to break down a lot and kind of exposing the fact that we're never really secure. And the real security that we have is in our connection to nature and in being in harmony with nature and like feeding into the abundance of nature and natural systems. But for me personally, that's been like a really scary thing to like learn to trust not only nature, but the flow of life, to not fight against the flow of life because I have my own opinions about how my life should look or what I should do, but rather to like actually be in the flow and to see that the universe is always trying to like put me in a good position and like provide for me and hold me in you know, in love and abundance. But to do that, you have to really be able to shed a lot of the negative self-image and programming that you've learned through growing up and, you know, being disconnected from that. And so I think that's a lot of what we're going through right now. It feels like to me is like really a time of like having to just shed a lot of outdated beliefs about ourselves, you know, and about like the other and about life itself, you know, like going back to the germ theory and terrain theory. I think a lot of the germ theory is this idea that like we should be scared of life, scared of microbes, scared of our bodies, that they might betray us, that there's something lurking silently waiting to capitalize on our, you know, bodies and kill us, you know. Whereas like the terrain theory is really more about like if you're in balance, if you're treating your body like a temple, trying to provide for it in a healthy way, like you don't need to worry about, you know, outside invaders. Like it's more about the state of the terrain, the environment being healthy rather than, you know, just some sort of pathogenic intruder. I don't know.
I'm so glad you went there, man, because that is so true. It's you know, we're very powerful beings, you know, and I think that a lot of what we're seeing in the world in this sort of mainstream dominant paradigm is always centered around limiting that infinite power and that infinite capacity for total self-liberation, realization, and empowerment because, well, once you're well, then these people are out of jobs. You know, you don't want to buy the things. You don't need the protection from the military and the government, you know, all this stuff. They need to sort of keep that in place and keep that sort of, you know, this is always comes up with like the pharmaceutical industry or the medical industry where it's like, you know, they just manage the symptoms, you know, that they don't actually offer the cures because there's no profit in that. And you could apply that, I think, to any large institution that's trying to gain dominance over your individual sovereignty and your, you know, that sort of thing. So, but I'm so glad you went there because that is where it's at, is, you know, going inward. And man, there's so many parts of myself that scare the shit out of me, and that, you know, that it's like, oh my God, I'm still not healed from that. And, you know, where's that showing up in my life? And, you know, that I think is where the journey lies, because when you can sort of embark on that while also simultaneously sort of paying attention to the exterior environment as well, I think that convergence really makes you a sort of, you know, the sort of kind of person that you want to be, where you're like self-reliant and empowered, you know, and growing up, you know, there's nobody in this world. Well, I'll say there's nobody, because I'm sure maybe there's some places in hunter-gatherer communities and stuff like that. But I think that in the limited number that still are around, but in at least the Western world, in America, so much trauma. Yeah. So much trauma. You know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, from my perspective, I think that trauma it gets, you know, to even say it, you think, well, I mean, I always thought like I would never have thought of myself as traumatized, you know, because I was under the impression that trauma meant like, oh, I got sexually molested or I got physically beaten or whatever. And neither of those things ever happened to me to my knowledge. But trauma can be as simple as like, you know, something that I've really been thinking about. It just sort of hit me the other day, yesterday actually, was just that like children, you know, like babies and children are just pure innocent creatures, you know, like they don't understand why you're crabby or why you're sucked into your work or why mom and dad are fighting or why, you know, mom yelled at me instead of like giving me a hug. You know what I mean? Like kids just need like the type of, I think, love and connection that kids need. We probably just don't even understand in our culture because we're too damaged, you know, like we've had too much disconnection from that type of pure unconditional love that it's hard for us to even comprehend, besides maybe how you treat like a dog or something, you know, like we usually are able to express unconditional love with pets pretty easily. And obviously people do it with kids and stuff too, but I think, you know, like the whole like idea of the Ferber method, for example, of you leave your baby in a crib alone and let it cry, you know, that's completely unnatural and completely goes against evolution. Like if a baby was alone crying, you know, out in a hunter-gatherer community, that baby is, for one, attracting potential predators, and also it's completely unsafe for it to be alone. Like babies need to be with a parent 24/7, you know what I mean? Like, and so I think just that in and of itself causes trauma. The fact that like we're told to, like, I mean, Gabor Mate's done tons of work and I'm basically just lifting his stuff here, but it resonates with me deeply and I've found it to be true for myself. It's just like, I think we all have trauma just from like certain times where we were crying and scared and we weren't picked up, or we were told it's okay, you don't need to cry, instead of just like held and shown that like you can express your emotions until they're complete and then you can go on about your day. We're like, our parents in a lot of cases have been scared of their emotions, so they project onto us fear of our emotions, so then we fear our own emotions, you know. And that's something that I've been like struggling with and like learning for the past couple of years, is really like reconnecting with like grief and terror and deep sadness and all of this stuff that's coming out, and it's just like super scary to just feel it and to like, you know, sit and bawl and not just like panic about it, you know what I mean? And the more I've
just like kind of allow it to happen, to go through it,
and the more I've done that, like I've gotten a little more comfortable with it, but it's still like scary to me, you know, because you kind of get put in the consciousness of that little kid that, you know, was alone or felt like he wasn't going to be okay, you know, and it's super intense for me personally anyways. But I think, you know, it just feels like that's the stuff that a lot of us just have inside, and that's where a lot of our like self-sabotaging, self-limiting things come from, is these feelings of that like we're not good enough and there's something about us that's wrong and flawed and bad, and there's parts of us that just weren't accepted by our caretakers, you know, and a lot of that gets into internal family systems stuff, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that's something I've gotten really into.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, you know, for a lot of the talk that's happening in the current climate, I would say, and a lot of what we were talking about, it's like really getting back to these really simple principles that wind up being pretty complex, that spiritual teachers have been espousing forever. Like you mentioned Ram Dass, you know, I like Ram Dass, I like Thich Nhat Hanh, I like Adyashanti, I like Chogyam Trungpa, like a lot of these guys, like love, love, fear, death, connection, community. I mean, these are the important things. And there's not a whole lot of, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we need more reminders of that.
Yeah.
We need to kind of remind, because what happened the other day? I think I found out somebody's mother got, cancer again after she had beat it and is going through this thing. And it just kind of like, every time someone tells me something like that now, I always try and really put myself in that position to fully feel it, not just like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but really kind of internalize like, oh my God, this is like somebody that's very significant to this person that they have a bond with. Like, how would I feel if it was my mother? And, really try and get into that headspace. And the more that you can get in there, it's like the more that you realize that a lot of the shit that we've built and a lot of shit we're like arguing about and all this stuff, it's like, doesn't really matter that much. And we're all going to die someday too. And, it's like, who knows when, And so, yeah, I'm glad that we're talking about this, because I feel like it's a integral part of I guess our whole conversation too, is like not leaving out these really intimate and personal aspects of the human condition in this reality.
Yeah, and I feel like, something that came up for me while you're saying that is like, I feel that potentially some of our intense reactions to stuff, like, let's say, I think vaccines are a good example, and questioning vaccines, or the idea that vaccines are so important that we shouldn't even talk about it or whatever. Some of that feels a little bit to me like an attempt to sort of run away from like hard truths. And to me, one of those hard truths is the fact that there is no simple answer towards like illnesses. That there are always going to be people that get sick, and some of those people are going to die, and being sick is not fun, and it's a tough thing where we suffer a little bit and we feel uncomfortable, and I think a lot of our culture has been based around trying to just like numb ourselves out from all of these experiences. Like we don't want to have coughs, so we take cough drops. We don't want to have headaches, so we take ibuprofen. We don't want to get measles, so we create a vaccine. And we're not really considering like what are the long-term effects of these things. Like or maybe we're supposed to get a headache every once in a while. Like maybe it's not a bad thing to have chicken pox or measles or something throughout our life. Maybe that's like a necessary part of human development, and maybe some of those people will die, and we know that some of the people who take vaccines die and get chronic illnesses and injuries from vaccines, and that's not a conspiracy theory point. That's a verifiable fact. And so I think some of it is sort of this, and I think it's maybe similar to the whole like political debate about like socialism versus capitalism versus this. It's like dancing around the fact that like no matter what system we have, no matter what solution we have, we still have like there's going to be pain, there's going to be trauma, there's going to be suffering. And until we can really look at that honestly and feel it and come to terms with it, we're not going to find a better way forward, Yeah,
we're just going to bring that junk to that new thing.
Exactly. And so it's like, yeah, okay, you create a vaccine, maybe you stop certain amount of illnesses, which is also debatable, but let's say you do like prevent a certain amount of illnesses in the short term, but you create uncountable potential things of, instances of chronic illness, inflammatory, what's the word I'm looking for? Doesn't matter. Inflammatory conditions and autoimmune conditions. That's what.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so now we have like the sickest kids, the sickest generation of children ever in human history. So it's like, what's the trade-off here? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I think that's the type of stuff that is hard to like come to terms with, because nobody's really at fault. You know, it's easy to say, oh, it's the pharmaceutical companies, blah, blah, blah. But it's not that simple, you know, like people want these things. Like people want vaccines because people don't want to get sick. And it's kind of all of us, you know, we're all victims and we're all perpetrators, you know, like the people who are causing suffering are suffering themselves, and vice versa. And so I think that's when you really feel the deep heartbreak of humanity, is when you realize that, like, you know, I've seen this around me. Like I have just certain things in my life that I've seen where I've thought certain people in my life were like perpetrators, you know, like they really did things to hurt other people or hurt me. And then after really kind of like paying attention to those things, you realize the only reason they did that is because they're suffering so much inside that they needed to lash out, project that out, inflict that on somebody else, because they couldn't face it inside of themselves. They needed to, you know, manifest it in the exterior world. And so that is just like, you know, heartbreaking to me to think that the people that we hate because we think they're the enemies, they're a victim of something else, you know, whether it's in their childhood or whatever else, and they're carrying around pain that's so great that they can't deal with it, so they have to put it into the world, you know.
Totally, yeah. And I think that, like, you know, it's like the guy who's the CEO of Pfizer or whatever, you know, it's like, he's just a prisoner of the symptoms that have been created by the collective trauma projections of the environment that we live in. Like, it's like, you know, we're all,
exactly,
you know, projecting these things into the outer material world, but it's coming from somewhere. It's coming from us and this sort of general consensus of like how things should be. And it's like, we're not perfect, but this guy is probably, I mean, does he want to be like going into work every day and like making sure that profits are up and all this stuff? Maybe he thinks that that's the game that he wants to play, but I think deep down there's something else there. Like there's some other need, there's some other desire, and this is just a certain kind of like character that you could play to sort of satisfy your base immediate gratification desires in this form or whatever.
Right.
You know?
But
who really wants to be doing that?
Right. And maybe it's just a compensation for some way that that person feels inferior or bad about themselves, you know?
Right.
Because I've had that in my own life of, oh, if I could just be a professional musician and people could like hear my music and think it's great, then maybe I would finally feel good about myself. You know, it's not like I thought those things consciously, but looking back, I can see like these unconscious feelings of that's kind of part of the reason why I do certain things, is to try to, you know, make up for low self-esteem or poor self-image, you know, these different internal feelings that you have about yourself that you kind of try to get a hold on by getting some sort of exterior validation, you know?
Yeah. Well, especially when you're creative, when you're an artist and you're creating things, I think a healthy dose of self-criticism is okay.
Yeah.
But we all dive into that unhealthy despair and, you know, just knocking ourselves and saying, you idiot, why did you do that? No one likes you. You're stupid. You suck. You'll never be good.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, like I've realized as we've been talking, like at certain times, I mean, I might sound like, and you, I don't know if you ever feel this way, but I might sound sometimes like a confident person, like I know what I'm talking about, or I have these strong beliefs and opinions, and you know. But honestly, what I would like people to know, if there's other people who feel like I do, is going into things like this, or between the times when I'm not talking to people, like I feel super insecure off and on, or confused and scared, and you know, like grieve about things, and I feel like I'm just as fucked up as anybody else, and I don't know what the hell's going on out there. I would just do my best to try to like find my own truth that resonates with me and You know what I mean? Like, try to work on my own shit so I can be a better person for the people that I come in contact with in my own life, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I feel that way too at times. I mean, I go through my own things, and I've thought about this quite a bit. And, you know, sometimes I see a lot of people like rising in popularity, and being like, oh, well, they're just like riling people up with like a particular message. And,
Yep.
you know, and I suppose that I probably had some of that in me too in the past that's still lingering. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to do that. I really want to have like deep, rich discussions. And I guess what I'm getting at is that it's almost like, well, I see there's like a path that's like seductive, that it's like, just go that way, and then you'll get all the followers and you'll get the things. And it's like, well, who knows really, right?
Yeah.
But it's but I see that sort of like that lure, and then how that affects you. I mean, when you have, of course, I think everybody goes through these feelings of like not being good enough, or feeling despair, or being lonely, or, you know, struggling and being insecure. But if you got a secure message, or you got a secure thing, I do one thing, or I believe in this one thing.
Yeah.
And you got people backing you, and they're like, yeah, hell yeah. You know, I mean, that's a way to go too. But I don't even know if, like, to me, I guess the point that I'm trying to make in this convoluted way is that, does that really give you what you're truly looking for?
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think it does.
Yeah, no, and I think that's why some of my favorite people, and the people that I find myself being more and more, you know, attracted to in terms of wanting to like listen to their messages, their content, you know, people like Zach Bush and Charles Eisenstein, and, you know, even probably Kelly Brogan I would throw in there, and these other people that like you can't nail down like who they are. You know what I mean? Like, you can, if you're able to perceive nuance and really like open your heart and mind to these people, but like, you can't put them in a box of like, well, they're liberal, or they're conservative, or they're alt-right, or they're anti-vax, or they're this. Like, it's people who like obviously have like cultivated enough sovereignty, and like ability to see complexity and nuance to where they can question vaccines but still, you know, trust the scientific method. They can, you know, talk about climate change, but they can still understand that there's problems with the Green New Deal, or with solar power, or, you know what I mean? Like, there's all these different things where in the current climate, it's like, if you have this opinion, then you must have these other opinions. And if you don't, then like, you know, you're not a real this or that. And I find myself realizing in myself, it's like, I have various different views and opinions on stuff that would put me in all sorts of different camps, you know, and or I'm unsettled on certain issues. Like I said, I support Bernie Sanders, but I really like a lot of things about Bernie Sanders, but I also see the value in like libertarianism, and like, I understand certain arguments against like kind of socialist type of ideas and all of this stuff. And I think that nuance and complexity is just like so important. And a lot of these arguments really are more about like the fact that we're kind of like, to bring it back to earlier, I do really think we are like going from one layer of, you know, a paradigm of seeing the world and certain things we value to another. And a lot of these things like that we're bringing up, like old political paradigms, they're just outdated and they're not going to work. And it doesn't matter what one we argue about. Like, there's something else that's going to be the answer, and it's not any of this stuff. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's like collective sense making. You know, I think like people learning how to think critically and analytically, and and listen and see things from different perspectives and hold sort of disparate or paradoxical notions, like
there you go,
or ideas. So I think it sounds like to me that we're moving more towards the direction of not attaching to like any like particular ism or label, institution or way, but to sort of really grok the whole of it, like, and just be like, oh wow, look at where we are and look at why, and then come up with new things.
Yeah, because like, I mean, in terms of, you know, like when we're talking about like Trump supporters, and if we're talking about like the more like woke movement, I would say those are the two kind of real polar opposite themes right now. It's like this sort of alt-right conspiracy Trump and the woke upper class, you know, whatever, corporatist kind of, those aren't all the same, but you know what I'm trying to say. There's these polar opposites, and I feel like in some ways each side kind of thinks like, fuck that other side, you know, like they're just a bunch of these guys and they're trying to destroy America, or they're trying to do this. And my biggest feeling that I get when I see this sort of stuff is, how can we ever, like, we are, whether you like it or not, like we're all living in the same place. Like we're like roommates of a country, or if you want to, or the world, you know, we're roommates of the world. And it's like, how are we ever going to like move forward in a healthy way if we're just saying fuck you to like thousands or millions of people? Like, no matter how much you despise their viewpoints, like, we have to integrate it somehow. Like, don't we? Like, I feel like in every argument, there's got to be at least some, even if it's minuscule, some percentage of truth, at least some perspective that they have, something that they're feeling that's true on some level, and that's why they're doing it. It's not just because they want to ruin things for you and your side. It's because there's something real going on with them that we need to listen to and integrate, you know?
Yeah, and like you were saying, like on a deeper level too, where there's something maybe deep down inside that's unresolved, some wounds, something happening, and there's some apparent truth that thing has a certain resonance with, and it's like, oh, finally a place for me to put that thing.
Yeah.
And so maybe the thing that they're attaching to isn't the truth per se, but that there's an element of truth that's coming from within them. And it's like, we need to start hearing people and listening to people. I watched this documentary about this guy. Thank you. This guy, Daryl Davis, who, like, he's this black guy who helped, if you know,
I love
familiar
this
with
guy.
the story?
Yep.
Yeah, he basically convinced all these Ku Klux Klan members to disrobe, to lay down. And it didn't like happen instantly. He didn't stand on a megaphone and preach. He didn't shout people down. He didn't protest. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He like accidentally started befriending some of them, or they befriended him. They were like, hey man, we like your music. And then later he found out, you know, they're KKK members. But I love that he was driven by this question of, how could you hate me if you don't know me?
Yep. And it makes sense, because it's like, if you're gonna give the other side, and this is going for both sides of any, pick your argument, it doesn't matter if it's racial stuff or vaccines or whatever. It's like, if you're gonna give the other side the ammo and just be who you think they think you are, then of course they're gonna just continue to hate you. Like, you're falling right into it, you know what I mean? But if you actually like show them like, no, I'm like a nuanced person, I'm willing to like have a conversation with you and try to see where you're coming from, like what's your side of the story. That's what's so amazing about this guy's story. And I can see how I could just hear people say, well, yeah, it's easy for a couple of white dudes to say like, to imply maybe that black people should just go and like talk to Ku Klux Klan members like calmly or something. And that's not at all what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say, like, in a general sense of any type of polarized debate or heated situation, like, I do really believe that the best thing we can possibly do is like have a calm, reasonable discussion with the other side and try to befriend the people. Like, a lot of people rip Joe Rogan, for example, for having like Ben Shapiro on or whoever else. And to me, like personally, I think I've come around to like, I think it's probably a really good idea. It's one of the best things you can do. Like, personalize people, like understand where they're coming from. You don't have to agree with what they say. And this whole fear about like giving people a platform, I just don't buy into it. You know what I mean? Like, personally,
oh my God, yeah.
People should be able to hear any opinions they want. And if there's no reason for it to resonate, then it won't resonate. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah, I think it's because people are afraid to give their inner shadow, their unconscious, places in them a platform.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I can't give that. Like, our whole culture is around hiding and tucking it under the rug and putting it away and ignoring it and out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. But we can't just live in a world where we just keep doing that all the time, where it's just like, cancel. I tweeted something the other day about how I was like, is cancel culture the prelude to social credit in the US? Because I could see that totally coming.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I could see people being like, well, we want to make sure where the bad people are. We got to get them out, the unsafe people. But it's just this, what's the end of that? We just terminate in the entire civilization.
Well, that's kind of the thing. It's like, unless you're going to round these people up on an island and exterminate them, then you're kind of like just going to fuel the problem. You know what I mean? Because you're just going to push these people underground and they're going to radicalize more and more to the point where it's like, well, yeah, if you're trying to silence me, well, then I must be right. Like there must be something here. And, I don't know, with all these types of things, it's like Paul, Paul Selig, that channeler guy, he had a great, what did he say the other day I heard him on Aubrey Marcus. He said,
yeah,
yeah, I know. He said, things come into the light to be lifted or something like that. Basically saying like, these dark things come into the light to be healed and lifted up to their higher octave, to their new way of being, not to be ridiculed and shamed and pushed back down into the darkness again, and there's a lot of good things that come from that dude's channelings, like you can't hold another in darkness and be in the light, which I think is a great one. This idea that everything is a manifestation of God, everything, and you can't pick or choose which things, like only the things you like no, every single thing,
everything.
And so the only way to like fully kind of like heal and bring things to this next iteration of being is to truly see things as God and see the divine in everything and come to some sort of like acceptance of the way things are. And I'm not saying I'm there, but I do believe that that's probably accurate.
I believe it 100%. I've always resonated with the teachings of Jesus. Like, I'm not a Catholic, or I mean, I guess I was raised that way, but I sort of went this like atheist route, and but then I discovered like, okay, well, if you actually hone in on some of the messages here, and Joseph Campbell was a big help, I think, with like comparative world mythology and looking at all the different traditions and Buddhism and down the range of like the sort of central core tenets and ideas.
Yep.
Where it's like having compassion. Looking at somebody who's like hate-filled and shaming and cancel this and get out of here. It's like, man, I feel like I'm sorry that that's your existence, that you have to be like, if you feel so consumed by that, like that must be suffering. Like that must be suffering, Yep. It's sad in a way. And it's like, I think that like, I don't want to suffer, and I would prefer it if other people weren't suffering as well, because I think it would be a much more enjoyable experience.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of like recreating the energy that you're fighting against, recreating the energy that you're disavowing. It feels like similar to a parent that spanks a kid for hitting somebody. It's kind of like, I don't want you to hit, so I'm going to hit you to teach you not to hit other people. That's how a lot of this comes off to me. Just a lot of the things I see in general with cancel culture and various things. And I kind of hate using those terms, because I don't like to put things in boxes like that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's
Me
just
too.
for the
Yeah.
sake of like being able to communicate it easily.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
I'm glad you said that, because I oftentimes try and avoid the sort of like words of the zeitgeist,
Same.
and talk about it in other ways to not really like feed that deity.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, because it gets way too easy to just like lump people into these groups and lump, things that are like phenomena that are happening and put some term on it and simplify it into some cancel culture. I mean, that means a lot of different things, and there are obviously benefits to like all of these things coming to light, and maybe some of these people being shamed for some of the terrible things that they've done does have some benefit in some way. It's a necessary part of the process, obviously, or else it wouldn't be happening. But I think there is kind of a perspective you can see where you can sense that it's a fighting fire with fire in some aspect, and there's an ignoring of the fact that like a lot of this stuff isn't just people trying to be evil or people trying to ruin people's lives. It's pain and suffering that's trying to be quelled through maladaptive behavior,
Yeah. I think there's very few people that wake up in the morning and just go, I can't wait to do some evil today.
Yeah.
Most of the time they think they're doing good.
Yep.
Yeah. But listen, Jacob, this has been incredible conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think we should do it again.
Definitely.
Anything else? What's going on with you right now? Maybe we can end on more of a kind of a positive personal note. If there is one.
What's going on with me? Well, summer's kind of starting to come to an end here in Minnesota. It's not ended yet, but there's some crispness in the air, which
sounds like a Bruce Springsteen.
which
summer's coming to an end.
Which means my honeybees are close to being ready to probably take some honey from them. I just harvested some propolis from them the other day, so it's my first year doing it, and it's been a pretty cool journey. So
you're doing the thing that I dream of doing.
Yeah, I'm trying.
I always say that. I always say I'm gonna move to the woods in a cabin and grow and make honey. So you got bees, you got a thing going on there. And you just started doing this. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was kind of a last minute deal. I found a dude who I was kind of late to the get going in the season, but I found a guy who already had a hive going, and he was willing to sell it to me. In the early summer, late spring, and so it's pretty cool to watch them, and just like they're amazing creatures.
Yeah, I had a bunch out in the garden the other day from mint plants that I didn't trim, and they're just all over. And I just sat there and watched them do their thing, and I was like, man, these are cool little.
Yeah, you got to get into it, dude.
I will.
But yeah, other than that, I'm trying. I've kind of been on a podcast hiatus, but I've been scheduling a couple guests and hoping to have some. I think Ray Archuleta, this really cool regenerative agriculture guy. I think I'm going to have him on soon, and some other stuff. Hopefully that'll be pretty cool. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been up to.
Cool. Where did you hear? I'm always curious to see where people like find people, so to speak. I mean, yeah. Do you have any like websites, resources that you look at? And
Charles Eisenstein kind of turned me on to regenerative agriculture through his book Climate: A New Story, which is a great book, and he talks about.
I just got it. Yeah.
It's really good. He talks about Gabe Brown. Gabe Brown is kind of like one of the godfathers of regenerative agriculture, and so through that, I got Gabe Brown's book, and Gabe Brown talks about Ray Archuleta a lot, and so then I subscribed to this podcast called the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast, which gets pretty deep into like straight up farming stuff, but I just find it interesting. And Ray Archuleta was on there, and he's just a beautiful guy, like talking about, a lot of this regenerative agriculture stuff is so awesome. Like a lot of the tenets are about how nature is more collaborative than it is competitive. And it gets into a lot of the themes that we've been talking about through this of like harmony and abundance. And the whole idea is not about like, you're not killing the job of a person who's trying to grow food in harmony with nature is not to kill all the pests and kill all the weeds and kill the fungi. It's to try to be in harmony and to use the symbiotic relationships in nature to the highest benefit and the most biodiversity and all of that. So that stuff's been super exciting, getting into regenerative agriculture and permaculture and all of that. I haven't put much of it into practice, but it's very fascinating to learn about. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to listening to that episode.
Sweet.
And checking more of that stuff out. So Awake, Aware, Alive, everywhere podcasts are available, right?
Yep. And a lot of my stuff right now is connected to Jacob Gossel. So that's how I am on Instagram, and my website is jacobgossel.com. But yeah, the podcast is Awake, Aware, Alive. And I actually just bought awakeawarealive.org. So I'm probably going to turn that into a website at some point. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, great. Hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. Till next time. Peace. Thanks, Jacob.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did, and more conversations like that to come. If you want to support the show, go to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star rating and review. It really helps boost up the show so more people can see it, get access to the kinds of things that we're talking about, the conversations that we're having here. If you want to go a step further, you can donate as little as $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/MikeBrank, BRANC. And at $5 a month and more rewards start to kick in, like the Mikeadelic Inner Sanctum Discord chat group and much more. And go to my website, mikebrank.com. You can check out all kinds of cool stuff there. Check out Student Loan Tutor. Go to studentloantutor.com and get a free evaluation for your student loan debt. Tell them Mikeadelic sent you, Mike Brancatelli sent you. And the Charles Eisenstein course on political hope. The links are in the show description. All the links for this stuff are in the show description. Check that out. It's going to be a fun course. I'm going to take it. I'm really looking forward to it, especially in this time right now. It's an election year, and I think Charles has a lot of really good things to say about the political spectrum of what neither side is talking about and what's important and what we should be looking at in a holistic, sacred, and spiritual way that serves life, and that that we can become agents of change. So go check that out. 50% off the Charles Eisenstein course on political hope. Everything is in the show description. And thanks to Danny Barnett and Galaxia for the music. Peace.